Hello, and welcome to this NJCU Center for the Arts digital event. We will allow camera and microphone use during the Q&A section at the end of the program. If you would like to send questions during the program, you can do so via the chat window. At the bottom of your screen if you are on a computer, or possibly the top right if you are on a different device, you should be able to see an option for chat. If you click that, it will open the chat window where you can type your questions so that they may be read aloud and answered. To speak during the Q&A portion, you will need to raise your hand using the participant window, which can be found near your option for chat. To raise your hand, please click the blue hand button at the bottom of the participant window. This will let us know that you are interested in contributing to the conversation, and we will call on you accordingly. Thank you, and enjoy the event. Please note, the views and opinions expressed in this virtual event and presentation are solely those of the individual artists in their personal capacity and are not reflective of nor represent official policy, position, or views of New Jersey City University.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Saturday series about creative process. I'm Stephanie Chaikin. I'm the director of the Center for the Arts at NJCU. And today we have an amazing program, The Art of Comics and Illustration, a panel discussion with artists Taylor Sterling, who's an alum from NJCU and the founder of RAE Comics, NJCU Professor Dennis Dittrich, who is the past president of the Society of Illustrators, Tom Daly from Simon & Schuster, and our moderator this afternoon is writer Edie Nugent. So Edie, I'll tell you a little bit about Edie. She is a New York-based writer, reporter, interviewer, and publicist with a passion for entertainment and what she calls geek-related media. Edie was born and raised in New York City, now residing in Jersey City, and she works as a freelance writer and reporter specializing in print and on-camera interviews. Edie is a staff writer for the Comics Beat, and her freelance reporting includes work for comingsoon.net, Common Sense Media, and Looper. And with her remaining time, Edie is the producer and publicist for Dialogue with Three Chords, a theater group that stages in-person and online readings of new work. So Edie, please start us off this afternoon.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Stephanie. Hi, I'm Edie Nugent, and I'm really excited to be here for this panel about breaking into a career in comic art or illustration. And I'm even more excited to introduce you a little more deeply to our participants, the first of who is Tom Daly. Now, Tom has been drawing and self-publishing comics for over 25 years, and besides writing and drawing long-form comics like West Side, which is a 200-page graphic novel he's currently serializing, he also creates what he calls essay comics, short comics about everyday experiences ranging from being thrown out of a store to being visited by his ancestors in crazy dreams. His comics are included in the Library of Congress's small press collection. In non-pandemic years, he regularly tables at comic festivals over the US. And after graduating from Parsons, he worked as a freelance illustrator for many years, doing editorial illustrations primarily for magazines and newspapers. He's also a manager of art and design in the children's department at Simon & Schuster, where he designs and art directs, graphic novels, chapter books, and picture books. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you.
And next up is Dennis Dittrich, who began his career as an illustrator in 1982 and earned his MFA from Syracuse University in 1986. And his clients include, here we go, they are illustrious and many: Sports Illustrated, Smithsonian, Field & Stream, Elektra Records, Golden Books, Reader's Digest, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. And his work has also been featured in American Artist and Print. He's presently serving the Society of Illustrators as the Hall of Fame Committee Chair and Government Services Committee Co-Chair. Dittrich served as president from 2008 to 2014 and has also chaired the Society of Illustrators Membership and Lecture Series Committees and is an active member of the Society's Air Force Art Program with work in the collection USAF Art Collection. Currently an associate professor at New Jersey City University, Dittrich also teaches in the graduate illustration program at the Fashion Institute of Technology. Welcome, Dennis. And finally, our alumnus, TJ Taylor Sterling, is the president and lead artist of RAE Comics, a dynamic indie comic company that focuses on telling powerful stories about unique and diverse characters. Taylor began his career working at the infamous Marvel Bullpen as a production artist. Post working at Marvel, TJ would go on to create cover art for Dark Horse, interior art for Aspen Comics, and most recently, sequential art for DC Comics, Batman Giant Issue number 5. TJ is also the writer and illustrator of the ongoing comic series Okamus. Am I saying that right, TJ?
Okamus, yes.
Okamus, completely wrong then. Okamus, published through RAE Comics, a sci-fi martial art action tale centered around a young man of color with a superhuman ability that could potentially save the human race. With a catalog of issues in stores and the hands of fans across the globe, Okamus has become a huge favorite in the comic industry, and his work can be found online at raecomics.com. Welcome, TJ. Welcome, Taylor.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all for being here. So we're going to start out. We want to introduce our audience. Thank you, audience, for being here. We've got so many people participating today. And as mentioned at the top, we're going to be opening up a Q&A at the end. The easiest way to submit your questions is to type them in the chat window, and I'm going to read them out to our panelists. So make sure to participate. I'm sure you've got great questions on your mind. But before that, we want to kind of introduce you to the art that these wonderful artists have made in their careers. And we're going to start with Tom Daly. So you should see an image that's starting to pull up on your screen. Okay, so Tom, tell us about where this image is from, what kind of client it was for, and how you made it, how it was made.
These are images from two different things, Edie. On each side, the blue and the white art are pages from my graphic novel, West Side. It's something I've been self-publishing. That's the 200-page graphic novel that you mentioned. Those were created by hand and then just using brush and ink and then scanned in and colored digitally. And I do some retouching, of course, in Photoshop when I'm coloring it, I fix things. The middle one is from several years ago. It was a little comic I did. In the beginning, when I went through a phase of making small, short comics, usually comical, funny. And so that is from that time.
Wonderful. And is that also the same process, pen and ink and scanned in?
Yeah, I've worked digitally for probably, the scanning part has been for 20 years at least. I still do most of the drawing by hand. It's still something I'm more comfortable with, even though I use Procreate for laying things out now.
And you're even more comfortable inking by hand than digitally, say?
It's my choice. It's my preference. The only times I don't ink by hand and I use digital like Procreate or Photoshop is usually when there's a deadline involved.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. And next we're going to move on to Dennis Dittrich, and we're going to see an image. Wow, and that's the image there in the center. Dennis, can you tell us about what this image is from, what client it was for, and how you made it?
Yeah, actually, this wasn't for a client, Edie. This was for an exhibit that we did at the Society of Illustrators. And about 100 illustrators were asked to do portraits of themselves before puberty. The show was called Beautiful Baby. So I chose to remember a day when my mother dressed me up like an idiot and sent me to Sunday school. And it's done with gouache. I lay it in like watercolor, and then when I overwork the watercolor, I go in with opaques. And this is why you study illustration history. The great Norman Rockwell advised us all, when your picture isn't working, put a dog in it. So there we are.
I love it. Thank you so much, Dennis. And Taylor, if we could see your image up next. There we go. So tell us, what's this image from? What client was it for? And how was it made?
Oh, great question. Thank you, Edie. Yeah, so this particular image was drawn. Well, there was no client. Well, the client was myself, RAE Comics, and the publishing imprint. Yes, the best client. The one that I look at in the mirror every day. So I actually drew this, the concept of what I wanted this to be on the train, on NJ Transit, going from back and forth my internship at Marvel at the time. And this was really supposed to be the cover for the first comic book I ever did myself. So I drew it, super small sketch in a sketch pad on pencil and paper, and then scanned it in, inked it in Photoshop, and then colored it in Corel Paint. So a couple different ways of doing it, but I really love the style of image, because for me, my background in illustration and painting and drawing with, classes that I took with like Dennis or Professor Castro, color theory, these types of things always kind of stuck around that fine art element. So I wanted to mix like fine arts and comics together with some of the stuff that I was doing. And basically what you're seeing is these four characters, kind of jumping out of a time vortex, coming into, our timeline, getting ready to fight and do some wild, crazy action stuff.
Right. That's excellent. Yeah, I'm getting a little Renaissance feel from that background there.
Thank you.
That's very cool. Well, excellent. Well, I'm so glad we got to see your art. The audience got to see your art. And so why don't we turn to asking you folks some questions. And the first I wanted to put to you was, how can a person break into comic book arts or book illustration? And I want to give you the opportunity to answer for how that worked for you personally, or, if you want to talk more expansively on the different ways you've seen people do it. So let's start again. Let's do it the same. We'll keep the same rota going. Tom?
Okay, thank you, Edie. So when I started was a long time ago. I'm sort of in Dennis's age group, so it was very different. And things have changed since then. Back then, it was a lot of sending out postcards and buying mailing lists. Nowadays, I see illustrators on Instagram a lot. That's where I tend to notice people. People doing the hashtags on Instagram. And that's where I tend to find illustrators.
Like a drawing challenge hashtag?
It can be. Portfolio Day is a big one on Twitter. But the hashtags on Instagram, everyone has different places they go. That's a place I like to go to. And that's where I tend to notice people. And I notice people who are consistently doing good quality work, and work that looks like it's of a body. They're not doing one thing one week, another thing a different week. So that's where I find people. And that's kind of, I think, from where I sit in a large publisher, that's a very, very good way of getting yourself established, because pretty much everybody's on Instagram.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a good viewpoint you have, because you've been working at Simon & Schuster for how long now?
I freelanced there for many, many years. It's been almost 20, actually a little over 20 now.
Wow. So you've seen things, you have seen things really change in terms of how artists are discovered. And right now you're saying Instagram, social media hashtags, that's a great way for someone to break in and get noticed.
Especially if you don't have an agent, because there is an audience waiting for you on Instagram. And there are art directors that check their favorite hashtags all the time. So it's a good way to get noticed.
I love how democratic that is. I mean, I remember hearing, I think that's how Babs Tarr, who illustrated Batgirl for some time and is pretty well-known illustrator now, she got found on Instagram. It really does happen. That's great. So let's move on to Dennis. And Dennis, what are your thoughts on breaking into the comics industry, or book illustration?
As Tom said, it's different than it was when I was coming up. When I came up in the business, people actually answered phones. The phones were these things that had cords on them, and it was nice because you could make personal contact. And one of the best guys doing this was Steve Brodner, who his advice was always pick 10 clients that you want to work for, and bother them until they get an order of protection. And it worked great because he did it with specific targeting, and I found that worked. For all the directory stuff that I ever bought into and all the mailings and stuff that I did, I found that if I made something and specifically took it to and pitched a particular publication that I wanted to work for, I often had better luck. And again, you know, somebody has to take your phone call, somebody has to give you an appointment. Back then, we actually showed portfolios, and that worked out well for me because I could look at somebody, shake their hand, show the stuff, and they could listen to me talk about how I did everything. So they knew that, or at least they figured that I wasn't some kind of lunatic that was going to go off on a bender and leave them hanging, because Tom will tell you that is something that any art buyer worries about. He buys art now, so he works both sides of that coin, and he can tell you that he might like a portfolio, but the next thing he wants to know is, how is that person going to ruin his life? And that is a concern. So personal contact for me was probably the best thing. Now, as Tom said, you got to live on social media. Instagram accounts. I have friends that are long established artists that still get work because they have Instagram accounts. People that are new in the business buying art that might not know a Jim Bennett or a Greg Manchess. They find them often on Instagram and say, huh, look at that. So anyway, yeah, you guys starting out, you have to have that. You need your website, you need a social media presence. Guys that came up when I did needed a phone.
Right.
Could I add on to something that Dennis said about that? Specifically about starting your career, trying to break into it in illustration. Dennis said I was on both sides of the fence, and that's true as an illustrator and as somebody who hires. What Dennis was talking about, the old days where you could actually get in and shake somebody's hand and they would size you up and decide you were trustworthy, that is kind of replaced by the social media portfolio. And so it's really important to constant good quality of work that looks the same, and you don't just make a bunch of work and then leave it. You keep adding to it, because that's how somebody on my side of the fence who's hiring is looking at you and going, man, she's posting a new map drawing every week. Like, I feel safe hiring. I'm thinking of a student I actually hired out of school about a year ago to do a map drawing for a book. And I felt comfortable hiring her, although she didn't have a lot of professional experience, because she so consistently posted and had consistently good work. So I felt safe. Like Dennis was saying, my worst nightmare wasn't going to come true because I'd seen her do what I needed her to do over and over.
You knew this
already.
person could hit a deadline and was reliable. They were showing
Absolutely.
that with the frequency of posts and the quality of posts. That's so interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really important to remember. Keep it fresh. And you know, Taylor, you are, you know, the youngest on our panel here, and you know, we were speaking a little bit before. In some ways, you know, those watching and hopefuls, your experience is going to be even more relevant to them because you're kind of the new school of what it means to be a comic illustrator. Can you talk about how you broke in and how you see people breaking in now?
Absolutely. I would definitely say that there's a little bit of, at least in my story, I spent most of my time building one-on-one relationships with people at conventions.
Mm-hmm.
So I would go to cons. I started going to cons back in 2005. My first convention I ever walked into was San Diego Comic-Con. And back in those days, you could walk in and get a ticket for $40. So
a lot of people, though. You are a brave soul. It's
yeah,
like tens of thousands. You just dove in.
I was visiting family in the area, and my aunt, who is a painter by trade, like she literally paints and does, you know, raku sculpture. You know, she's a fine artist in every sense of the word. Said, hey, you like comics, you like illustration. Why don't you check this place out? It's, you know, only about an hour and some odd change away. So again, we buy tickets, I go in, and then I was in love with I was already in love with comics, but the industry of how it looks when people are interacting one-on-one was really incredible. So I always encourage people to build a one-on-one, you know, like camaraderie, a friendship, and, you know, just that name recognition. You know, oh, Taylor's been coming to cons for the last 10 years. He always comes to this particular booth. He always comes, talks to me, always buys stuff. He always asks for opinion. He's like, hey, do you mind showing my work? And that was one of those places where I would bring my physical portfolio to show some of the artists that, you know, I admired, and, you know, they were gracious enough to give me feedback. And every single year I would come back with better work and better work and better work. And then slowly from that point, I would start getting jobs. And then when the internship was a big possibility, or right in my lens, if you will, because I knew so many of those people who worked at in the industry, they were more willing to bring me on, for 3 semesters, which is like a full year's worth of internships, which is typically longer than what they have for normal people. Usually you do 1 and then you're done, and they bring other people in. But I was fortunate enough to stay on for a long period of time. So I learned the business from one of the big 2 and saw how production worked. I saw how freelance comps worked. I saw how editorial worked. So it was like really me soaking it all in, taking those notes, getting to know those editors. So I understood who were some of the players at that level. And since that time, so many of them have gone on to do different things, work for different companies, do lots of great stuff, but they still remember me from being an intern. And, this is a decade ago. So, and since then, obviously Instagram, Facebook is big, but also I think now the biggest thing is understanding the markets, because something like TikTok and Twitter is very young, very, very young in terms of the age range. So you're talking like 10 all the way to high school, maybe early college, you're going to get on those platforms. And then Instagram's a tiny bit older. Facebook's a lot older. So where are you sending your work? Where are you posting your work? What type of audience are you trying to get? Because just like Dennis and what Tom were saying, that you can get work on Instagram by posting consistently. My biggest thing is telling younger artists to not look for the magic bullet. Just produce as much work as you can and constantly be in a space like, I am not content with how my work looks. Have that Vincent Van Gogh gene, that you kind of hate your work just a little bit, enough to want to push yourself to that next level. So when someone is ready to look at your work, you've already put in the reps. It's like, kicking a bag or going to the gym. It's the same muscle memory. And muscle memory is a word that, one of my friends at Aspen Comics told me, Peter Steigerwald, who's this incredible colorist who, biggest guy in comics, he's a giant, but the kindest person. He says, muscle memory is the key. Do this 1,000,000 times, and then you're going to be able to do it without even thinking about it. And then it's like jazz. So, so many different ways to do it, but personal one-on-one connection is big. And if you can't do that because there's a pandemic, build your portfolio and then continue to push yourself online.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's really good advice. And, since you mentioned practicing, I wanted to ask all 3 of you, what kind of art training did you have, or would you recommend? And let's start with Tom.
I had really good art training. I was very lucky. I went to Parsons School of Design. I went there at a time when I know all art schools, not just Parsons, they fluctuate in terms of it's whoever's teaching there. And I hit a really good time. And I walked in there and just hooked up with the right teachers. So I got a really strong grounding in painting and figure drawing. I got nothing in comics. Comics didn't exist as far as Parsons was concerned. And that was a little weird. But anyway, I spent my time at Parsons getting a very, very good grounding in drawing and composition and color. I was very lucky.
And those things play into, obviously we saw your art before, and it was a very individual, recognizable style that was, to my eye, very sort of indie and expressive. But I think something that people forget when they look at a style like that, or even like find, finished sort of superhero noodly comics, is that there is a foundation of, observational drawing, figure drawing, colors. And from that base, you create your style. That's how it worked for you?
Yeah. I think you first you pursue what you're interested in drawing, I think. And then if you're in a good school, they make you draw everything. So you can't only draw what you're interested in. And then my experience was I got out of school and I sort of focused more on what I was interested in, and then quickly realized, especially in comics, you kind of have to be able to draw everything. And I'm sure Taylor can speak to this too, that you can't not be able to draw a horse. or you're going to spend your career avoiding drawing horses, and that it doesn't work.
I get it.
Tell Mike Mignola to draw you a car and see what happens.
Yeah, he's famous for hating to draw cars.
Absolutely. Not doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, a couple of things came to mind of people who are famous for sort of edging certain things out of the panel that they don't like to draw. So I mean, there's some of that.
Feet, hands.
Feet and hands. But I mean, it's good advice. I mean, you're creating a world, so you need to know how to draw everything in it.
And you have to draw. You have to know how to be yourself. Like, I know Mike Mignola is a great example. He apparently was very fascinated by an artist named Bernie Wrightson, who is everything that Mignola is not. He's very fine, little brush strokes and tons of detail. And I remember listening to Mignola talk, and he said at one point he realized that wasn't who he was.
Right.
And so he became this guy that is very black and white and very bold. He went to his strengths. Even if he won't draw a car, he had the artistic, I guess, intelligence. I don't know if that would be a good word for it, to be able to go, I shouldn't be doing this even though I want to, because it's not where my strength is. And I think that's important for any artist.
Absolutely.
Powerful.
Dennis, what do you think about art training? What training did you have, and or do you recommend?
Well, I'll start with, what Tom said.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good answer.
No, really, you learn how to draw. You learn how to draw, and again, you don't draw just what you want to draw. You don't start by drawing something stylistic. You just draw things, and you learn how to replicate form. And I would say the hat trick is linear perspective, anatomy, and color theory. Learn those three things. Learn those fundamentals, and then, as Cezanne said, you have to learn to paint on simple forms, then you can do anything you want. If you learn that, you'll find that everything you're ever going to draw breaks down into a cube, a cone, or a cylinder. And if you learn how to draw a shoebox from any imaginable angle, you can draw anything in the world. I can prove it. So anyway, that's
is that an exercise you do in class?
Through this stuff. He had to endure me saying this all the time.
I would just jump in and say it was an exercise I had in class. I had my drawing teacher, the one I certainly got closest to, is a man named William Klutz, who was a painter. And he went through art school in the 50s, where in art schools in the 1950s, they're like, figure drawing is dead. We're all going to splash paint around. And he was furious. He was never taught to draw. So we had to go out and get a cigarette pack, a hard pack, not the squishy kind. Exactly, it's the small shoebox that Dennis is describing. We had to bring it to class, and when we were drawing the figure, in his world, everything was flatter on one side and wider and longer and narrower on the other. So you could literally, a bicep would be the cigarette pack turned sideways, because he wanted us to learn volume. So that's a version of Dennis's shoebox that's so important.
Yeah, that's it. And if you stress those basics, there's nothing you can't do. I mean, nobody wants to do that because it's not fun. You want to draw what you want to draw, but trust me, if you just put yourself through the rigors of these exercises, there's nothing you can't do. And that's what gets you to the point where you want to be. And when you're comfortable, when you get comfortable drawing the kinds of things you want, what happens is your wiring takes over, and it's how you see things. And the biggest comparison I make with myself is I have a friend who used to do a lot of romance covers. The women with cheekbones 2 feet above their head, people that are more beautiful than people really are. And she was fantastic at it. She had a sixth sense of what is beautiful. I do not have that. Nobody is ever going to call me for a romance cover unless it has to do with a pickup truck and a shotgun. So that's not what I do. The way I see things, the only thing I'm any good at is making fun of stuff. And I decided that if that's my strength, I'm going to try to marry my art to it. And that's what I enjoy, and that's why I went into humorous illustration. Because if you give the three of us the same manuscript, we're all going to draw a different thing. And same words, same text, same narrative. We're all going to give you a different picture. Well, what happens is your personal wiring, the way you see things, once you understand form, and once you understand color, and once you have some command of anatomy, the way you draw things is it's a reflection of how you see them. And then your own language evolves.
Right. Wonderful. Well, Taylor, so what are your thoughts on this? You went to New Jersey City University yourself. You studied with Dennis. So we know that you
I
got
managed
some
not
of
to
this
hurt him.
training.
What do you think of that?
Yeah, it looks great. He seems in great shape.
Yeah, no, this is a fantastic question. And when I came to Dennis, it was kind of an interesting time because I had spent so many years not only taking as many art classes as I could in high school, but I also took art classes in the summer because for me, I always consider myself to be a consummate artist. Like I love everything. I enjoyed, sculpture. I enjoyed ceramics. I enjoyed art history. So to me, to, understand how to be the best artist I could be, I wanted to try to understand every facet of art that was appealing to me. So, I come to, NJCU, and obviously illustration was my major, but I absolutely loved art history class. So Midori Yoshimoto's class was incredible. Dennis Roberty's class was incredible. When I had a chance to go to take my first sculpture class with Brian Gustafson, it was an incredible class. And to me, it was feeding all of those different facets of art that I was hungry for. I knew I wanted to do illustration, but I think each one of these teachers can say, oh, hey, well, he was doodling while he was doing his homework, or he was doing comic book related stuff. So it was always kind of in there. And I think when you do have a full spectrum picture of the type of different types of art, well, hey, I've tried this, I've tried that. And it kind of informs a much clearer decision, for what you want to do at the end of, your time in school, or just say, even if you're not in school, you're teaching yourself all this stuff. YouTube University is a big thing. People research everything on YouTube. You can figure out how to draw something on YouTube. You can figure out how to build something. You can figure out 3D modeling. Anything you can find, it lives on YouTube. So you could teach yourself. But my thing is telling everyone, every young student, every young artist that I meet, just try everything. Don't limit yourself to just illustration or to just this, because then you won't see around the corner that there's other information. And the art history stuff that I learned still informs the things I do today. It informs some of the writing I do. Some of the stories that I tell is through the lens of art history. And even when I'm building like a mock-up, or I'm directing a 3D artist, who's doing something for me with 3D modeling, or they're doing something for me by hand, my sculpture background comes into play there. I'm able to direct them properly because I have all this catalog of data in my brain. So try everything is my point.
Right. Well, you're describing a very artistically rich, well to draw from. So you want to increase that. And you were saying it up top when you were showing us your comic book cover that you were sort of drawing from painting, from a painting tradition, and wanting to combine that with comic art. So I think that's what the best artists do, is that they sort of mix and remix things until it gets the feeling you want. So you want to have all the tools at your disposal.
Correct.
Yeah, and I think that is something that at least I've seen when I've been at conventions and people are showing portfolios. A lot of times that's the feedback that's being given, is broaden your artistic palette, if you will. So once someone has gotten their background, they've gone to drawing class, they've done their sculpture class, or they've gone on YouTube and they've spent hours sort of trying different things. What kind of work can an artist do to sort of define their career goals, like comic art versus illustration? How do these different goals change an approach to a career as an artist? And Tom, do you want to start?
It's funny. I don't know if other people think this way, but I think there's a bit of a divide between being a comic book artist and being an illustrator. Illustration, yeah, yeah.
Grand Canyon.
Yeah, yes, Dennis, absolutely. Illustration is the art of a picture or several pictures, but comics is really the art of storytelling. And it doesn't matter who the comic book artist is, or even the writer, or if you're both. But even if you're you're making a comic out of somebody else's script, you have to be a storyteller, and that's a very, very different skill set than being a good illustrator. And good comic artists are not necessarily good illustrators, and vice versa. So I just got going, and Edie, I don't remember what the question exactly was.
So how do different goals, so those two career paths, how do those different goals change your approach to developing a career? So say if you're going for one or the other, how would you then define your approach to sort of pursuing a career in one area or another?
I think, well, for illustration, again, it's sort of what I talked about earlier. It's getting on those platforms and being consistent, which I want to say relates to what Taylor was talking about, because you want to be consistent on a platform in what you're making, but you need to go try a lot of different things and nourish yourself with a lot of different media. Try sculpture, try this, try that, because that thing that you do that people will want to hire you for, you have to make that grow. And that's what Taylor was talking about, that feeding yourself these different inputs is really important. Comics, it's a little different. It's meeting people. It's getting to the conventions. It's, I think, much more, and maybe Taylor could speak to this because he may have a different experience, but my experience in comics, it's much more showing people things, getting their feedback. A comic is very complex. It's panels, and then it's pages, and then it's a whole story. I saw somebody sign in earlier. It's somebody I've known my whole life who I show him everything because he's a very good writer and he's a very good editor. And I wouldn't send something to the printer without Steve having seen it, because he's my second reader. And I wouldn't necessarily need to do that with an illustration. An illustration is 3 sketches to the art director, little tweak, maybe a better idea at some point, and boom, you're done. So that to me is the difference.
Okay. Any thoughts, Dennis?
Yeah, I would certainly agree. Comics and graphic novels, that's making a movie.
Right.
It's an enormous amount of work, and you have to love this thing, because if you don't, you're going to go out of your mind. I never wanted to be a comic artist. I used to like reading comics when I was a kid, but I bore too easily, especially with my own stuff. And I don't want to work on panel after panel and page after page. I'm going to get bored. I like what Tom says, 3 sketches to the art director. In my case, it's 50 sketches for me before I can stand anything. And then to the art director, and then revises on that, and then fine, then done. And that's fine. And I like working that way. And I like telling the story in one panel, or if it's, an article that takes a series of illustrations, that's great too. But that suits me more. And rather than wanting to tell an epic story, I basically want to take pot shots at stuff. I want to make fun of this. I want to make fun of that. And pretty much that's what my career has been. And I really, art directors called me, really to make fun of things, because I did a lot of work for trade magazines. And quite often what would happen, the way that would work, is it would be something that had to do with business or finance or some intangible idea. And we had to create metaphor to make a picture, because, you can't have a pound of finance. You know, you can have the representation of it that comes in a cloth bag with a money symbol on it, but you can't. It's an intangible. So I had to make stuff up, and that's the fun in it for me. I love making things up, and that's why I'm such a pest about learning how to draw boxes, because if somebody calls me and said, listen, we need this thing and it doesn't exist, you have to invent it. Great, I'm there. I love doing that. That's fun. And so the market is different. The market that I worked in for most of, for the most part, is very different from the comic realm that Taylor works in, and that Tom also works in. So that's the difference for me. Now, how do you start it? Where do you find your work? You find who uses the kind of work that you like to do. One of the best examples I have in what not to do is, I have a friend who is the art director for American Greetings, and they do greeting cards. And I said, give me a soundbite for my portfolio class. And he says, tell your people to research who they're sending their work to. And I said, elaborate. He says, yes. He said, I get these beautiful portfolios from an art school in Florida named for a circus that will remain nameless. And he said, I get these beautiful portfolios full of angry Vikings. I run a greeting card company. I don't use angry Vikings. I use funny animals and flowers. He says, I get these beautiful portfolios, and what am I going to do with them? So I would say that's a big one. Know who you're talking to, research your target, and take your work to people who buy that.
Right. So know what you like to do, whether it's grand storytelling or working on one image that's either, satirizing something or illustrating an idea or a concept, and that'll take you in the right direction, and then know who your audience is.
Yeah.
Before we jump.
And as Tom said, build a body of work so that it's consistent. Don't make it look like lightning struck that day and I made this one thing and I was brilliant a month ago. But if you have this body of work that's repeatable, then that will buy you credibility, especially if you're just starting out. If you've been doing this for a long time and somebody says, well, you worked for all these magazines and you didn't wreck them, okay, that buys you some credibility. But early on, if you can show that there's consistency in the way you think and in the way you execute, you're ahead.
You're ahead.
As Chris Payne said, take the time to get good.
Before we jump to Taylor to answer this, because I'm very interested in what you have to say, I wanted to announce that we have a contest going as an offshoot of this panel. So all of you that are watching, we are asking that you check your email following the panel. You will receive a link to a Google form where you can fill out and enter to submit a piece of artwork that you've created. And we're going to give you a prompt. And that prompt is fighting the pandemic. So those of you who are artists, those of you who are not artists, but just enjoy art, this is not going to be judged on the draftsmanship, the quality of your piece. Submitting your art piece gets you an entry into a drawing to receive a prize from one of our illustrious panel members. So there are 3 prizes up for grabs, anything from a print to an item from one of their online stores. Just create a piece of art that you put some time into. Doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be creative about fighting the pandemic. And there will be a Google form in your email following the panel for you to submit that piece of artwork. And we're really looking forward to seeing those. So even if you don't normally draw, just go for it, because drawing feels great even if you're not great at it, I would say. So back to you, Taylor. What is your experience in terms of comic art versus illustration, different goals, changing your approach? What interested in you about that question that you wanted to speak to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the school NJC did a really good job of kind of outlining different types of career paths and what it looked like, and there were so many really great professors that were working in their respective industries, so they could speak directly to what that market was like at the time. And I know for me, I was either looking at commercial illustration or comic illustration as something I wanted to do. And I was kind of on the fence, you know, in the middle of my college years, trying to understand what path I was going to go down. And I know for me, because I loved animation so much, and I loved film, and I loved storyboards, and I saw so much potential in this environment. Like I knew all these amazing artists that started as comic book artists, but then got work in storyboard films, working on TV shows or movies. And some of my friends to this day are working, you know, at Nickelodeon or Lucasfilm, and they started as comic book artists. So now they're working on various different really cool things. So to me, all of that was very, very exciting because I love cartoons. I'm a big child. I never grown up. I don't think I will. I mean, look at Dennis. Like, he's been the same age for like 30 years. So it's, you know, the art keeps us
Remember,
young.
Taylor, you're only young once, but you can stay immature forever.
It's true. Only grow up in the ways that you have to.
Correct. But yeah, for me, it was just what was the most attractive. I mean, for me, I love telling, you know, it is a lot of work telling one comic book page, like turning the angles, you know, a close-up shot versus like, you know, a dramatic distance shot or an establishing shot or a silhouette. Like it's always, to me, it kept the page interesting because I'm always doing something different. And I think for me, I always wanted to tell a story. I'm a storyteller. And now that I'm writing comics that I'm not illustrating and I'm handing that off to different art teams, it's helping me understand how to tell a story better because I have the drawing experience behind it. So understanding the market, doing the research, obviously, you know, knowing who you're sending your stuff to, which is an absolute great point that Dennis and Tom made earlier, understanding the market so you know what you're getting into. Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, I want to make sure I leave enough time at the end for a couple of other segments we're going to do, especially the Q&A, because I can see the questions coming in. We're getting some great questions. So I think I'm going to end on a final question, which is, how can a person work to create a freelance career that can support them financially? This is a big question. It's, you know, whichever part of it you want to speak to, whatever advice you think would help those watching, because it's great to be great at drawing and it's great to be able to market yourself, but being able to sustain a career that, you know, allows you to, you know, get paid in more than exposure and, you know, actually pay your bills is a challenge. So Tom, how do you approach that?
Yeah, there are a lot of different elements. I would say, especially if you want to do more than one thing, like you want to do comics and illustration, there's different legwork involved in making both of those things happen. I would say be very clear of your goals, and figure out what your goals are for the year, and then check back in after 3 months, and then 6 months, and then 9 months, and then a year, and keep track of where you are moving towards those goals. And be very conscious if you feel like some of the goals that a particular goal you might have been working towards for 9 months is no longer important to you, so that you're not chasing a bus that you don't care about anymore. You know, be it a particular comics publisher you've been sending stuff to or something like that. But I think a really important thing, since there's a lot of moving parts in a freelance career, is that you just really need to keep an accountability log, essentially. And you need to check it about every 3 months to see exactly where you're at on all your different goals.
Right. That's such good advice. Dennis, what's your advice for a freelance career that can sustain you in comics or illustration? Oh, you're muted, Dennis. We can't hear you.
I'm sorry. How about now?
No problem. Yep, okay. We hear you great now.
The first thing you want to do is front end load the whole thing. What I mean by that is, I don't care what you do, but save enough money to live for a year. Put that in the bank. Then then you're not living hand to mouth. Then hit the street and do your freelance. And hopefully you won't have to tap into your, a whole year of cash. But that will at least give you a cushion. so that you can take chances and you can negotiate and you can try to get the kind of work that you want to get. Nowadays, a lot of people really diversify. It was less that way when I started out. I was told by older illustrators, just do this and don't do anything else. Right. There are a lot of children's book artists that do various things in graphic arts, and that can pay off in two different ways. Taylor is a great example. He learned graphic design, he learned typography, and he worked um, in graphic arts doing those things to support what he was doing in comics while he got his illustration career going, because a lot of Taylor's comic work is entrepreneurial. He's his own client, and then he had to go out and sell it. But I know he supported a lot of that with graphic design. So that's more common now than it used to be. So if you have another area of graphic arts that you can work in, exploit that. Another way that can be helpful is, let's say you got a staff job as a junior art director or a junior designer. Guess what? You meet a lot of people in graphic arts, and some of those people buy art, and most of them know other people who buy art. So you've tapped your way into this big Amway pyramid, and it's a way of creating a network. So you're doing one thing, but then you can show off your other stuff. So I would say that one, front end load it with a financial cushion, and the next thing is probably in this environment, diversify.
Okay, wonderful.
That help any?
And yeah, very helpful. And Taylor, so why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience, and the entrepreneurial side is very interesting. Because that's definitely sort of I feel like a newer wave of how people make comics now, and especially comics for audiences that are traditionally underserved by the big two or by mainstream. And that's a huge way, I'd imagine, to build a following and get people interested in your work. So what does that mean for you, supporting yourself as a freelance comic entrepreneur, mogul?
Thank you. It's always interesting when I think about careers and juggling in general, because when I first got out of college, the job market was really interesting. There wasn't really a whole lot of illustration jobs out there. So, but there was tons of graphic design jobs. There was tons of production artist jobs. There was tons of art teaching jobs at the time. So to me, as long as you have a job of some sort that kind of feeds what it is that you're doing, then you're still going in the right direction. You're still steering the ship to the destination that you want to be in. So for me, I worked in production and graphic design in Manhattan for 10 years after I left, NJCU, and, had very, very lucrative relationships that I built from those experiences. I was able to, have a regular solid salary. So, I could, obviously live and work. And, if you want to build a business of any kind, whether, you're making mittens or whether you're making comic books, all of that stuff requires capital. And, it doesn't come out of nowhere. You have to, obviously work for it. And then, maybe you get a good chunk for, money back from your taxes. And then, you save that, and you save that for a couple of years. I mean, one of my mentors who came to NJCU was a single mother of 4 kids who started her own comic book company, after she had quit her, corporate job. She saved money for, I think, 3 or 4 years, and had like a nest egg she was sitting on, saying, hey, I've got about 10 grand that I want to devote to building this business, getting the advertisements out there, going to the right conventions. So to me, it's like, save your money is the biggest thing. And, you can, in effect, nowadays build a following on Instagram or, some of these platforms, and get consistent work from that if you're consistently posting. So, you could do that as a side thing until it takes off to the point where you are, making, a lot of money per illustration and you got lots of clients. And then from there, you can completely jump into it. I personally like the model of like, have a graphics related job, because all the stuff that you learn at that job can, really be cross-functional in terms of applying that knowledge to something else. Like, for example, I work in InDesign quite a bit with the jobs that I have now. So all of the InDesign experience helps me make better comic books, because everything is put into comic books nowadays in terms of the page making process is all InDesign. And I learned that through working in my production graphic design experience, or that leg of my my business when I first started. So there's nothing wrong with having a gig to support your dream, and possibly go from there.
Wonderful.
Could I add something small to what Taylor said?
Sure.
I had a similar experience to Taylor's. I took a production class when I was in art school, and so I ended up doing freelance production for a lot of years, and along with some design and other stuff. But it helped when the illustration jobs, there weren't enough, there wasn't enough income from that. The production jobs were always there. And to echo what Taylor said, it's also really important, particularly in comics and nowadays in illustrations, because everything is digital, is that if you have taken advantage of the ability to take a production class in school, you learn about InDesign, you learn about how Photoshop actually works, not just doing cool stuff that looks cool. It's really important.
Not just the memes.
Oh my God, yeah. Because when you turn in that job, or when you take on a comics job, like coming from Taylor's background or my background, exactly what it takes to do that job, and that's really important. And I would say this to any students listening: Procreate is great, but it's not your friend. It's cool to make an image, you can layer it, but you've got to understand how production works and how Photoshop works, or you're going to turn in an image that can't be used. It's blurry.
Yeah.
It's not set up correctly. And those are things that you have access to learning in school, and it's much harder to learn it later on. So I think that's just really important, that production aspect, for regardless of whether you want to go into comics or illustration.
Wonderful.
Agreed.
Thank you, Tom. So we're going to do a little process page section here, and I see there are wonderful questions coming in, but I will encourage you folks, while you're listening to this, to go ahead and submit your questions, because we're going to have the Q&A right after this. And a reminder about our contest as well. So you're going to get a link in your email following this presentation, and we want you to submit art. Doesn't have to be perfect, just creative, about fighting the pandemic, and you could win some wonderful prizes. You entering your drawing means that you get a chance at the drawing for one of 3 prizes. Okay, so first we're going to pull up a picture from Tom. And Tom is going to talk about his process, sort of from sketch to final image. So what are we looking at here, Tom, in terms of your sketches?
Sure, Edie. This is for a comic. It's not for an illustration. It's the process it's the process I need to get to the page that has the 8 or 10 panels. And I start out by thinking about a story, and my comic stories are entirely self-generated. I self-publish, so I tend to write about things that interest me. And it starts on the left is just a page from a writing pad, where I just start writing things. In this case, it was about taking a judo class when I was about 9 or 10 years old. So I start by writing what I remember, and trying to think more and more about it and remember more and more about it, and then pull out the stuff that seems important, and then start to put it on Post-it notes. And Post-it notes, I think, are just the best thing in the world for making comics, because you can move them around. And so that's the thinking that starts. I start with writing, then I go to Post-it notes. In the middle, it's rougher, and then on the right, I start to tighten things up and start to letter things more neatly. And then eventually that takes me into the final comics page, but that's my process. Here it's kind of abbreviated,
Sure.
what would be on the left here would be after the Post-it note. I get to the very rough layout. And that's starting to look like the final comic. And then in the middle, the blue line is just the actual sketch. Nowadays, I could do that in Procreate, and I often do, because I do like that you can move things around, tweak things more easily and quickly in Procreate.
Oh my goodness, mixed messages, Tom. Procreate, yes or no?
It's a tool.
Okay.
It's like any tool. I mean, you know,
Right.
I got a car parked downstairs, but you got to know how to drive the car, or you're going to end
Fair.
up running over somebody, right?
Gotcha.
Yeah, but I wouldn't use, I mean, people do, but for me personally, I couldn't start out in a Procreate or even on a comics page. I have to, for my process to make that final comics page, I have to start with just writing sentences, and then I like Post-it notes. So I use Post-it notes and I move them around. And then I end up, that gets me to the final comics page.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see, folks, it should be inspirational when you see his starting out, just scribble, scrabble sentences, little sketches, and works out to the final project. So, you know, there is a process here. And let's look at Dennis's process. We're going to pull up an image here. Okay, so we've got 2 starter images here. Dennis, do you want to talk about this?
These are sketches that that got me closer to what the finish was going to be. What you're not seeing are the 20 little thumbnails that you would need an Enigma machine to decipher, because my thumbnails are so sloppy, they make Tom's thumbnails look like finishes. And nobody knows what they are but me. But the good news is nobody else has to. But I go through a whole lot of those just to plan the space, just to help myself think, and just to get all the ideas that may or may not work out of the way till I get to where I want to go. Now, this was an article for a baseball magazine, and I wound up sending the art director 3 sketches, you know, down from about 30, and the first one, the black and white, it's just, this is a Xerox of my pencil sketch, my rough pencil sketch, and this was an idea about there was a guy named Charlie Finley who owned the Oakland Athletics, and just when free agency became a new thing, he decided before Vida Blue and Raleigh Fingers could go free agent, he was going to sell them. So they called this, you know, Charlie's fire sale. Well, Bowie Kuhn, who was the cop, Bowie Kuhn was a commissioner of baseball at the time, and these 2 guys were so different. Bowie Kuhn was this Harvard guy, I don't know, just, you know, all buttoned up. Charlie Finley had made his money as a wildcat oil man in Texas. So the 2 guys were from very different cultures. Well, Kuhn hated Charlie, and he was always trying to, you know, always trying to shaft him. So the idea here was Bowie Kuhn is a cop, and he's coming after Charlie, who's having this fire sale. So anyway, this was number 3 sketch, and it's Charlie out in front of the his baseball store, you know, with a sandwich sign, hawking these guys.
Right.
And then all the color piece is just watercolor dropped into the Xerox of my color sketch, or the Xerox of my pencil sketch.
Okay.
And
so you're not, are you lightboxing it, or are you?
No,
just over.
I just make stuff up.
You just watercolor over the pencil.
Over the Xerox.
Copy of the pencil, over the Xerox itself.
Yeah, the Xerox, the pencil sketch was probably about half the size, and then I just blew it up because it's really a refined thumbnail at that point. So I just need to know where everything is.
Right.
And this, the art director knows what my finishes look like, and he knows that they're not going to look like this, thank God. And so all I did then was drop watercolor into it to change my drawing from a line drawing to a shape drawing. And it's as much for me as it is for anybody else, because where am I going to have these big fields of color rather than, you know, outlines and contours? So this is just me telling myself what I think I want to do.
Right.
And then,
Okay.
After that, this is the one that he
And
picked.
the-
He got 3 of these, and then I did the finishing gouache.
And then here's the final.
Yeah.
And is that drawn from whole cloth using these images as a reference, or are you going over
No,
your
that
pencils
one-
again?
Now that one I light boxed from the sketch and I tightened it up,
Got it.
because once I have the sketch, once I have the space arranged the way I want it, I'll do a very loose light box sketch just for position, and then I'll redraw and tighten things up and refine things, and then I start painting.
And then you get that final slick,
Yeah.
smooth,
Beautiful.
gorgeous
Yeah.
image here. That's
Yeah.
wonderful. Well, the final image we have is from Taylor. So we'll pull up Taylor's image, and here we can see the process from point A to B to C. Taylor, do you want to talk about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is so on the far left you see the final pencil drawing, which was done on Bristol board at that time, and then in the middle is the inked version, and then the right is the photoshopped colored version. What you guys aren't seeing is, again, all of the process sketches, behind the first pencil drawing. I mean, there was quite a few just to try to get that the big budget movie scene, where you introduce a character, there's explosion behind them, or there's something, like a fire that, is, illuminating the area. And, I posed for this myself. And then I also ended up not using the pose that I did, but, reference, posing, it was a part of sometimes my process for trying to understand a pose, or maybe a dynamic angle and some of the perspective. But really just, I try to do is really, really tight, clean pencil work, and then transfer that to inking and then coloring. Nowadays, I'm drawing right on a screen. I'm using a Cintiq drawing tablet through a program called Clip Studio Paint. So because I'm able to sketch digitally and do very light, I can obviously put that another layer, drop the opacity down, and then basically go on top of that and re-ink my own sketch, and that gives me the same type of feel, and I'm saving quite a bit of time. Like I get hours and hours back onto the actual drawing board, or the process, which is really helpful. So this is my older process, and now I've taken out one step of that because I'm doing digital and whatnot.
Amazing. And here's another image of looks like an inked version to a colored version.
Correct. Yeah. Like,
is this
so
one of your digitals where you don't have that process anymore you were talking about?
Yes, this is straight to digital. So you see the left, this is from Alchemist issue 4, where again, I'm using Clip Studio, and they've got tons of really amazing brushes and then different, things. And because like I have the painterly thing in my head, like I wanted to do tones and different things for like, some electric, effects, and all that's me thinking about lighting, and I'm able to do so much of that stuff in the program, which is really, really fun. So I sketched this out by hand first on, a separate layer, and then tightened everything up. And it was a lot easier for me, because then I'm like, how do I say this? I ran into this pen and ink artist years ago I think it was at an art show. And he said, when you go right from concept or your initial doodly kind of crappy sketch to ink, it's like you have to make critical decisions in real time. So I took that to heart, because when I'm doing this now and I'm drawing digitally, I'm making critical decisions at the inking stage, which is almost like the point of no return. But the beautiful part about these programs is that the edit undo button, Command Z, is like your best friend. So, or you
can be braver in your approach.
A tiny bit braver. And if I really don't like something, I can delete it and then reposition something else in. So, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've drawn a panel and put the entire page together, disliked at least 2 of those panels, and redrawn all of them, and then just kind of fit it back into the box, because it's like a puzzle. So, yeah.
Wonderful.
Your coloring is so beautiful.
It really is great.
Appreciate that.
I have Edie. Can I just step in for a second? I'd like Taylor to tell us how he figured out how to draw these explosions, because he couldn't just copy that from nothing exploded in his apartment. that he could
Hopefully.
just take a picture of. Well, I don't know, maybe you did it. I've never seen it.
my art table exploded.
But these are things that have to be dramatized, and there's no real reference for them other than perhaps what other artists have done. I'd like Taylor to talk just for a minute about how he decides how to make something like that.
Yeah, I mean, explosions are something that I've practiced for years because, you know, I always thought that they were so challenging to draw. So I'm like, I have to get decent at them so I can, if I'm going to draw an action comic book, I have to be able to learn how to draw explosions. Otherwise, you know, I'm going to get fired I'm going to fire myself from that job. But yeah, it was understanding the lighting on an explosion, because obviously if you have the explosion at its core is mostly light. It's, you know, the you know, whatever it is, the TNT, or, you know, I was a big Dragon Ball Z comic fan, so like the energy blast, the lighting would be on the inside, and then everything else from the outside would be either smoke or clouds, or the atmospheric part of it would come in. So you'd get pieces of, you know, again, dark and light kind of moving in every direction. So lots of looking at reference, lots of, you know, practice, lots of understanding that, hey, this is kind of how it looks. But then,
a little bit of science, understanding the science of it.
Understanding the science of what an explosion is. Again, sometimes some of these brushes help. Like I know if I'm painting kind of like in this transformation scene, you can kind of see like he gets a new form, he gets like a new suit of armor. So I wanted it to be like a very anime-esque background where you have like some gradations of color, and then I actually have all these cool lightning brushes I bought. So like literally dropping in the lightning brush and then maybe adding on some you know, some slightly painted, if you will, with an airbrush, you know, tones to it to kind of make certain parts pop. Again, I was before drawing clouds by hand. Now I'm mixing by hand clouds with some of the brushes that of clouds that I've been able to buy. So, you know, just mixing it wherever you can and building on top of what's existing.
Right. Wonderful.
Edie, one more thing. You mentioned Taylor's color. I'm going to tell a story on him. When Taylor was in school, this goes to the point of work beyond and do things beyond what's required. Taylor was trying to figure out color, digital color, and how do I color my comic. So Taylor, out of pocket, when he was a student, paid a professional colorist to color one of his pieces just so he could see and learn how that was done. I've never seen anybody do that before or since.
That's really genius.
That because he knew where the information was, and he knew what he had to do to get it.
Yep. I think that's happening more and more because as you folks were talking about the ability to connect with artists on Instagram and social media, I have run into that more often where, you know, fans or even people writing something will hire someone as a conceptual artist to work on an existing project, and you know they're able to do that. That's a great idea. So let's make sure we have time to rope our audience in here. We have some wonderful people. We have people from as far away as Germany, Santa Rosa, California, Edinburgh.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really wonderful. So I just wanted to like shout out those folks who are saying hi from these far away places. We've got a lot of great questions. So the first one I'm going to put to you folks is there any comic past or present that you wish you had created?
Oh man. I wish I created X-Men moment #1. I mean, that's the comic that got me into this business, and you know, Jim Lee's a
Giant
genius.
size X-Men?
Yeah. Oh man. If I could just rewind time and just like, you know, push him out of the way and, you know, finish the drawing myself, I'd do that.
All right. Tom?
Most anything created by Jack Kirby. I just think he's amazing. And if you don't know his work, you should check it out if you want to do comics. He's a big guy in that world, just as a draftsman and a storyteller.
Yeah.
Like Jesus.
Dennis?
I'm going to go with Arthur Burdett Frost. These two guys know who he was, but he was an illustrator, and probably one of the first guys to really do great anthropomorphic animals. He did the Uncle Remus series in pen and ink. He was brilliant, and first guy to draw a rabbit wearing a pair of pants.
Wow.
So yeah, I admire a lot of the illustrators from American history, and yeah, I wish I was them, but I don't wish I worked at that time because of dentistry. So
Fair.
You know, that kind of wrecks the romance and everything. But yeah.
I think it's in the Invisibles. They say, I always forget how bad the past smells.
Exactly.
Anyway,
True.
But boy, those guys could draw. They could really.
Boy, they could draw. Yeah. Great question from Connie. Can you recommend any go-to resources for understanding the market better?
The comics market or the illustration market? Actually, either of them. If you put into Google agents wish list, there's a website devoted to what literary agents are looking for. It's a super helpful tool. To get to most major publishers, you need an agent. That's just unfortunately a rule of thumb. And the agents wish lists are really good places to look for things.
Okay. Anyone else know of any resources or?
I would say for comics, just navigating through some of the sites that constantly post comic book news, like CBR or Newsarama.
Comics Beat. We have to. Thank you.
Yes.
I have to plug my
yes, I was thinking Comics Beat, Bleeding Cool.
Sure.
You know, there's lots of really great little fun sites that have current comic book things that are going on in the industry and the drama, the cool stuff. You can find everything on those sites. I definitely recommend being a part of that. Wizard World magazine is coming back as a digital publication, which is going to be really awesome. If people liked Wizard World in the 90s, it's going to be back. So that's pretty exciting too.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I always
ahead,
tell
Dennis.
my students, if there's an industry you want to work in or a market segment that you want to work in, try to make a personal connection with someone who is working in that business, and don't go ask them for a job. Ask them for information. It's called an informational interview.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, the only reason I know anything is I've been doing illustration for so long. I used to illustrate for National Business Employment Weekly, and they would tell graduates to do this stuff. That's the only reason I know it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not smart enough to have made it up. Anyway, if you go and you find someone who is doing the kind of thing you want to do, and you say, listen, I'm trying to get into this. What do I need to show evidence of? Let them tell you. And if the first guy says, I cannot spare 15 minutes for you, I'm far too important, call the next guy.
Yeah.
And just, keep pestering people. Somebody is going to be nice to you, because people remember when they, were starting out. You're not threatening them. You're not trying to get their job. You're saying, listen, it's just like what this is. What do I need to know? And it's, we're telling you general things, but even you want to be a package designer, go to a package designer and talk to him and say, listen, what do you need to see evidence of so I can get in an entry level spot? And let them talk to you.
I think there's a tendency for people to want to help young people, and that is tremendously to your advantage when you were just out of school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So someone's asking, let's see, another TJ. TJ is asking, as a writer, how can I most effectively find and work with artists? What's the best way to engage with them and share my vision while protecting my concepts? So I think the second part of that question, because we've already talked extensively about different ways to network. What's the best way to engage with an artist if you're a writer and protect your concepts?
It's a great question. I mean, I'd quickly just add that when you're doing art, not to lose sight of the reason why you're doing it. You're doing it because you enjoy it, because it's fun, because it's rewarding. So you want to work with people that are fun, rewarding, exciting, and people you respect and admire, and that you have a cohesive energy with, like a connection, if you will. And I do think that building that connection takes time. So, you know, pacing yourself, being patient, and saying, hey, okay, well, I'm going to give this one artist a shot and see how they do on this piece. And if it works out really well, then you give them another piece. And hey, why don't you try doing, you know, a comic book page or a bigger thing for me? And it's like just feeding the animal little by little. And, you know, you'll know that, okay, this person couldn't meet my deadline and they were really hard to get a hold of, or they were difficult to work with. And then you'll be able to weed that stuff out very quickly. And when you do find a core, you know, group of people you can work with, consistently reward them. So it's like, for example, you know, people who, a couple of guys that work on my team, I gave them a raise this year. So instead of their regular 75 page rate, they'd get $80. So it's like, and without even them asking for it, I give it to them because I want them to know that I appreciate them. And then that gives them this incentive to continue to just kick ass and do great stuff for me while I'm working on my other great stuff.
Yeah.
Can I add on to something that Taylor just said? And it needs to be stated really, really explicitly, because I think we've all implied it throughout this conversation, but it needs to be said. The most important thing about your career is making deadlines. You can't blow off deadlines. Right. It's really important because, again, they're depending on you. It's what Taylor is describing. They're depending on you to make the deadlines. And frankly, if you build up a track record with people, the day you can't make a deadline, they'll give you a lot more slack and be much more understanding.
Very true.
Don't make that day be the first job.
Yeah.
You know, see if you can get some of this in the bank first.
For sure.
I was going to ask if Anna could pull up our social media handles so that everybody watching, I've gotten a bunch of questions about how folks can reach out to you. There's a comic journalist in here who's mentioning that they want to do some interviews. There are other folks who are wanting to pitch to you guys, especially you, Taylor. So here are where you can find all of the panelists online. We've got Instagram, Twitter, for all of us. So grab a pen and write that information down. Maybe this is something we could include with that follow-up email as well that has the contest link. I'll remind you of the contest again.
We're also going to drop this into the chat as well, this information right there, so you can copy and paste that, and I'll show you the contest information and then put this back on the screen.
Okay. So there you go. That's what it's going to look like when it arrives in your inbox. When you click the link, you will see this kind of a Google form. Winner will be chosen randomly. There are 3 different prizes, and the goal is just to be creative and have fun, you guys. So one of the other questions in here that I think I kind of want to end on, we only have a couple of minutes, is do you have to be a perfect artist to be a comic artist, to be an illustrator, which I thought made me laugh internally, because what does that even mean? But yet I think a lot of people are intimidated. You know, we don't want you to be perfect. We want you to have fun with this contest. And what do you guys think about that? Just broadly, final words in terms of career, about not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good.
I'll start with that one. I've never done anything that's perfect and have no plans to. So there. I don't do perfect. I just do convincing. And if it gets done what I want to get done, because you have to start. Some of the funny thing is, you know, there are artists who are very good, but they're scared that they're not good enough, and they won't get the stuff out from under the bed. No, I have to keep practicing. No, get it out, show it to somebody. Conversely, I've had students that were really way behind the curve, and they would show their work to God himself. So it was, you know, completely upside down. Perfect for me has never existed.
Right. So be a little fearless and convey something rather than seek to be letter perfect. You want to convey a feeling or an idea.
I say, you know, if you can manage to say what you want with your pictures, start there. And then if you can say what somebody else wants you to say with their pictures, they'll pay you.
Anyone else? Final thoughts?
Yeah, I quickly say is that take things with a grain of salt in terms of critiques, in terms of, I mean, you want to, first of all, mastery is a lifelong thing. I mean, people who are masters, who, you know, everyone looks up to, will tell you that their stuff is not good enough. Someone like an Adam Hughes, who's absolutely incredible as a talent, will tell you he's not satisfied with his work. And I think that's just, again, that Vincent Van Gogh, not really, you know, being completely content with what you put down, but, you know, being, you know, okay with it for the moment and continuing to push yourself. So always push yourself, be extremely aggressive, be hungry, and do not let anybody, you know, take away from you the stuff that you have created, and be, like Edie was saying, a little fearless, and realize it's a lifelong pursuit. And if you're showing up to the gym every single day and working out, you're going to get muscles, whether it's, you know, on the 5th day, and on the 10th day, you might look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. You never know. Like I said, it's just the repetition, constantly putting in the time.
Yeah.
There's
no shortcut.
Your routine.
What?
Speaking of bodybuilding.
I guess I would add to it that it's a lot of work, and it can be a lot of fun, but you don't want to do it alone. Most creative people know other creative people, because you want to form a community, and you want to form a community of people who you can go to for advice, and you can go to for help. And you can also just show what your work is up to and say, what do you really think of this? And get an honest answer. Those relationships are really important, and they will help sustain you on your way to building something.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Well, thank you folks so much. This has been, you know, I wish we could talk for double the time. This was so much fun, and I hope you, the audience, thank you for showing up. I hope you got a lot out of this. We've got right on the shared screen here on where to find folks on Twitter, Instagram. So any questions you wanted to ask that I didn't get to include here, you can do that. And don't forget to enter our contest. We want to see what you guys come up with, what your creativity leads you to in terms of fighting the pandemic. And there's been a request to include the Twitter and Instagram social media handles in the email that will include this link. So, and our theater manager for New Jersey City University, if that's something we can do, that's been requested. And,
absolutely.
Wonderful. And thank you to New Jersey City University for providing this wonderful series of programming and for giving me this opportunity to speak with these incredible artists. It's been so great. I've really enjoyed it, and I hope you have too.
Edie,
thank you.
Thank you, Edie.
Taylor,
Stephanie.
you just
Thank
rock.
you, guys.
You rock. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. It's awesome.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I want to also give a special thanks to Anna Carhart, our theater manager, Justin Tinker, technical director, and Sabrina Sabalo, our box office manager and Zoom maven. Thank you all for being here today. Your energy and participation are amazing. And we want you to keep coming back to our programs. We have a very full spring. So we're gonna show you a few things that are coming up. We have the 7th annual 100-word reading marathon on February 11th. And we are going to have a gallery talk with visual artist Theda Sanderford on Tuesday, February 16th at 3 p.m. And then next up, we have an afternoon with author and award-winning educator James Kelly on Saturday, February 20th at 2 p.m. And then speaking about community, a life-changing writing partnership, how to find and cultivate it even during quarantine, on Tuesday, February 23rd at 6:30 p.m. So you can visit our website for the whole series of events for this spring, njcu.edu/arts for tickets. And you've been a joy to be with today. So thank you all again for being here. Yeah, keep writing in, send in your entries into the contest, and keep engaging with us. Thank you so much.